Begging culture vs Islamic concept of earning. What if I told you that the hand you stretch out to beg could actually be the same hand that carries the key to your dignity, your power and your destiny? Think about it. A hand raised to beg versus a hand raised to work. One drains you, the other uplifts you. Which hand do you want to be remembered for? Let's open the first door. Begging may seem small. Just a coin here, a favor there. But do you know what it does? It slowly steals the soul of a person. It plants dependency. It says, I cannot, but others can. I am weak, but they are strong. And that mindset, it becomes a cage with no locks, because the prisoner never even tries to leave. Now, let's open the second door. Islam came with a radical message. The Prophet Muhammad said, the upper hand is better than the lower hand. Meaning, giving is stronger than taking. Working is nobler than begging. Earning, even if by carrying firewood on your back, is better than sitting idle with an empty palm. Why? Because work brings dignity. Work brings freedom. Work brings barakah, blessing that begging will never bring. Let me give you a picture. Imagine two young men in the same street. One spends his day sitting by the roadside, asking, brother, a little help, sister, a small coin. By the end of the day, he may collect enough to eat, but his self-worth eaten away. The other, he sells dates or shines shoes or drives a cart. Maybe he earns the same amount or less. But at night when he eats with dignity. His children see him as a provider, not a beggar. His heart at peace. Now tell me, who is richer? Here's the secret many people don't realize. Begging is not just a financial act. It's a psychological act. It teaches you to lean instead of stand. It conditions you to expect instead of strive. And the more you beg, the less you believe in yourself. But Islam flips that script. It teaches, even if you have little, work with it. Even if you fail, try again. Even if it's humble, do it with honor. So today, you stand at a crossroads. One road leads to dependency, pity, and loss of self-respect. The other, to dignity, faith, and the true Islamic spirit of earning. The question is, which road will you take? Remember this, you were not created to beg from people. You were created to work with people and to rely only on Allah. And that, my friends, makes you part of a select group, the group that carries dignity in their hands, honor in their work, and blessings in their lives. Begging culture creates dependency and destroys dignity. Islam values the upper hand, the one that gives, not the one that takes. The Prophet encouraged earning through honest work, even if humble. Begging is not just financial. It's psychological, shaping how you see yourself. Honest effort, no matter how small, brings respect, freedom, and barakah. True honor lies in relying on Allah and striving with your own hands. Imagine for a moment a man sitting on the edge of a busy street. His clothes are worn, his eyes tired, and in front of him lies an empty bowl. Every passerby represents a possibility, but not because he sees them as friends or equals, or even fellow humans on the same journey of life. No, he sees them as saviors. Each footstep makes his heart jump. Will this one stop? Will this one give? And when they don't, he feels invisible, crushed, smaller than before. What he doesn't realize is that every time he stretches out his hand, he's not just asking for a coin. He's giving away a piece of himself, a piece of his dignity, a piece of his independence. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, his soul shrinks under the weight of dependency. There's something dangerous about begging culture that goes far beyond the exchange of money. It's not about a coin or a note. It's about the psychology that settles into the heart. It whispers, you cannot stand on your own. You cannot create. You cannot build. You must wait for others to rescue you. And when this whisper is repeated day after day, it becomes a voice, then a shout, then a reality. The person begins to believe that he truly has no worth outside of what others will hand him out of pity. This is why the begging culture is so destructive. It doesn't just empty pockets, it empties the spirit. Think of a child growing up watching his father return home after a long day of begging. The father's hand may carry bread, but his eyes carry shame. The child learns something dangerous, that survival comes not from effort, but from leaning on the mercy of strangers. He sees his father ask, plead, and wait, and he absorbs the idea that dependency is normal. The cycle continues generation after generation, not because of poverty itself, but because of the mindset created by begging. It is no longer about hunger or desperation. It becomes about identity. The Prophet Muhammad once said, "A man keeps on begging until he comes on the day of resurrection with no flesh on his face." The image is striking. Why no flesh? Because dignity is the face of a person. When someone begs without need, without striving for another path, that dignity is peeled away layer by layer until there's nothing left to recognize. Begging doesn't just affect how others see you. It changes how you see yourself. You no longer feel human in the full sense of the word, no longer feel capable, no longer feel responsible. You begin to feel like a shadow drifting on other people's kindness. There's another story people rarely tell. Have you ever noticed how those who live on begging develop a strange dependency? Not just financially but emotionally. They wait for sympathy. They expect pity. And when they don't get it, anger grows inside. Instead of gratitude for what little is received, resentment builds for what wasn't given. The soul starts to rot from within, chained not by hunger but by entitlement. And that's why begging culture is so dangerous. Not just for the beggar, but for society as a whole. A society that normalizes begging loses its spirit of productivity, its drive for progress, its sense of collective honor. It's easy to toss a coin into a beggar's hand and walk away feeling charitable. But the hidden truth is that every coin given without encouraging effort, without offering opportunity, can sometimes strengthen the cage. It reinforces the message, stay where you are, depend on others. Don't try. That is why the Islamic tradition has always balanced compassion with responsibility. Feeding the hungry is noble, but pushing someone toward earning is even more noble. It's like the difference between handing someone a fish and teaching them to fish. One feeds the stomach, the other feeds the soul. Now, picture a different man in the same city. His clothes may be simple, his shop small, but his eyes are alive. He stands behind a stall, selling fruit, or sharpening knives, or repairing shoes. The work is humble, but his back is straight. Every coin he earns is a victory, a piece of his own effort transformed into sustenance. When he takes that money home, his children see him not as a man who waits for mercy, but as a man who provides with dignity. That image lives in their hearts. They learn that no matter how small, honest work brings pride. This is the difference between begging culture and the culture of dignity. Begging enslaves while effort, even the smallest, frees the spirit. Dependency is not about poverty. It is about giving up the belief that you can stand. And once a person gives up that belief, they lose more than money. They lose themselves. There's a saying from the Prophet Muhammad, that carries the weight of centuries of wisdom. The upper hand is better than the lower hand. At first, it sounds simple, but when you sit with it, really let it echo in your heart, you begin to realize it is more than just a saying. It is a philosophy of life. The upper hand, the hand that gives, is not just physically higher. It is spiritually higher, emotionally higher, socially higher. It represents strength, honor, and the freedom to help others. The lower hand, the hand that takes, represents dependency, need, and the silent burden of humiliation. Imagine for a moment two people meeting on a street. One reaches into his pocket, pulls out some money, and drops it into the hand of the other. To the world, it seems like a simple act of charity. But beneath the surface, something deeper is happening. The giver feels a sense of control, of power, of gratitude to God that he is in a position to help. His heart is lifted. The receiver, on the other hand, feels a sting deep inside, even if he smiles, because he knows in that moment he is dependent. He knows his survival, his next meal, rests in someone else's decision. One hand is lifted in generosity, the other lowered in desperation. And the Prophet A told us clearly which one is better. But here is the beautiful secret. Islam does not discourage helping the needy. In fact, Islam encourages it strongly. What it discourages is creating a culture where the lower hand is chosen as a lifestyle, where begging becomes a habit rather than a necessity. Islam uplifts the spirit of striving, of doing whatever you can to put yourself in the position of the upper hand, even if it means carrying wood on your back and selling it in the market. There is dignity in sweat, dignity in struggle, dignity in earning, even when the work is small. Think about the carpenter who works with rough hands, the tailor who bends over his sewing machine late into the night, the farmer who digs the soil under the burning sun. Their earnings may be modest, but each coin they earn carries weight. It carries the fragrance of effort, the blessing of honesty, the strength of being the upper hand in their families. When they give food to their children, it is food seasoned with dignity. When they pay for their homes, it is money that echoes with freedom. They may not be rich, but they are kings in their own right, because they are not bound by the chains of dependence. There is a famous story of a man who once came to the Prophet A asking for help. Instead of handing him coins, the Prophet I asked him what he had at home. The man replied that he had a small cloth and a bowl. The Prophet A had these items sold and with the money bought an axe. He placed it in the man's hands and told him to go to the forest, gather wood, and sell it in the market. Days later, the man returned with the glow of pride on his face. He had earned with his own hands. That single lesson was more valuable than 1,000 coins. It transformed him from the lower hand to the upper hand. The upper hand is not only about wealth, it's about mindset. A person who gives time, gives knowledge, gives encouragement, becomes the upper hand in someone's life. Even a smile, the Prophet A said, is charity. That smile too is an act of the upper hand, because it uplifts instead of asking to be uplifted. This is why Islam emphasizes self-reliance and generosity. It wants believers to stand tall, to be contributors, not consumers of pity. Picture a society where most hands are upper hands, where neighbors support each other not from a place of weakness, but from a place of strength, where the baker feeds the orphan, the merchant helps the widow, the teacher mentors the student, not because they are forced, but because they are able. That society flourishes. It walks with dignity. It holds its head high before the world. The truth is, the upper hand is not just better, it is blessed. It carries barakah. It carries the joy of knowing that Allah used you as a channel of goodness. And once you taste that feeling, once you experience the honor of being the giver, you would never trade it for the heaviness of the lower hand. Because the lower hand waits, the upper hand creates. The lower hand depends, the upper hand empowers. And that is why the Prophet elevated it, not as a mere preference, but as a way of life. There is something profoundly beautiful about the way Islam views work. It doesn't glorify only the grand professions or the glamorous titles. It doesn't tell you that you must be a merchant with caravans crossing deserts or a scholar writing volumes of wisdom to hold dignity. No, Islam whispers a different truth. Dignity lies in honest effort, no matter how small. The Prophet Muhammad A, the man who received revelation from the heavens, told his followers that if one of them were to go out, gather firewood on his back, sell it in the market, and bring home his earnings, it would be far better than asking another for help. Can you imagine the scene? A man bent under the weight of wood, sweat rolling down his forehead, hands blistered from labor, but his head held high, because he is providing with his own strength. That image carries more honor than the image of a man seated idly with his palm open, waiting for another's charity. There is a story of a companion who once came to the Prophet A, asking for support. The Prophet, instead of simply giving him money, asked what he owned. The man replied that he had a mat and a cup. The Prophet A sold them and with the money bought him an axe. He placed the tool in the man's hands and told him to go cut wood and sell it. Days later, the companion returned, not to beg, but to share his success. His face shone with dignity, his eyes sparkled with hope. The axe had given him more than an income. It had given him self-worth. That was the teaching of the Prophet. Don't just hand someone a coin, hand them the ability to stand. Think of the carpenter, hunched over his bench, carving wood into something useful. His hands may be calloused, his back may ache, but every dinar he earns carries the fragrance of honesty. Think of the woman who sits with a spindle, weaving thread until late at night, selling cloth piece by piece. The world may overlook her, but in the sight of Allah, her effort is noble. When she places food on her family's table, it is not just food, it is a meal flavored with dignity. Honest work is like planting seeds in a field. The fruits may take time to grow, but when they come, they nourish both the body and the soul. There is a dangerous illusion in this world that only wealth brings honor. But Islam shatters that illusion. It teaches us that it is not the size of the paycheck, but the purity of the effort that determines your worth. A man sweeping the streets with sincerity may stand higher in the sight of Allah than a man sitting on a throne built on corruption. The Prophet himself, before revelation, worked as a shepherd tending to sheep. Later, he engaged in trade with honesty so remarkable that people called him Al-Amin, the trustworthy. He never saw work as humiliation. He saw it as elevation. And by his example, he taught us that there is no shame in humble effort, only shame in laziness or dishonesty. I once heard of a man who spent his life selling roasted corn by the roadside. People often looked at him with pity. But one day someone asked him if he ever felt ashamed of such work. He smiled and said, "I will never be ashamed of fire that cooks food for my children. I would be ashamed of sitting idle and letting hunger stare them in the face." That is the spirit of Islam. To see honor in effort, to see nobility in striving, to recognize that every drop of sweat carries more pride than a mountain of unearned gold. The Prophet also warned against deception in earning. He said, "The truthful merchant will be raised with the prophets, the truthful and the martyrs." Imagine that. A person who sells goods honestly, without cheating weights, without false promises, without greed, standing alongside the most honored people in paradise. That is how high Islam elevates honest earning. It is not just economics, it is worship. It is not just livelihood, it is ibadah, an act of devotion. Every coin earned with integrity becomes a testimony before Allah. Now picture a society built on this principle. Imagine a market where every seller speaks truthfully, every worker puts in honest effort, every transaction carries fairness. Imagine children growing up watching their parents return home, not with fortunes perhaps, but with the pride of having earned through sweat and sincerity. That society would not just be rich in wealth, it would be rich in honor, in trust, in faith. And it all begins with the simple teaching of the Prophet even if it is humble, even if it seems small, earn with your own hands, and let your heart taste the sweetness of dignity. When most people think of begging, they think of an empty pocket. They imagine someone without food, without shelter, without resources. But what they don't often see is the deeper emptiness, the one that forms inside the mind. Because begging is never just about money, it's about identity. It's about how a person begins to see themselves, how they measure their own worth, how they stand or fail to stand in front of the world. And the most painful truth is that while poverty may end when money arrives, the scars of dependency often remain long after the hunger is gone. Picture a man who begins by asking for help one day, perhaps out of necessity. He tells himself, "It's just this once. Tomorrow will be different." He receives what he asked for, and for that moment, his problem is solved. But when tomorrow comes and he faces another hardship, his mind remembers the ease of yesterday. Why struggle? Why sweat? Why risk failure when you can simply ask and someone else will solve it? And so he asks again. What started as survival becomes habit, and habit becomes identity. He no longer sees himself as a man who can. He begins to see himself as a man who cannot, not without others. The real prison is not his empty wallet. It is his belief that he is powerless. The Prophet Muhammad once described the heart as the ruler of the body. If it is sound, the whole body is sound. But if it is corrupted, everything else follows. Begging without necessity corrupts the heart in a subtle but devastating way. It teaches the heart to be small, to lean, to expect, to live with a constant sense of need, even when the body is capable of effort. The person may still breathe, still eat, still move, but his spirit is shackled. His dignity erodes grain by grain, like sand slipping through fingers. Think of a child who grows up watching his father beg. Every day he sees his father approach others, eyes lowered, hands stretched. What lesson does that child absorb? He learns that manhood is not about standing tall, but about bending low. He learns that provision comes not through effort, but through pity. And that child carries the weight of that example, shaping his own sense of worth. This is why the cycle of begging is so hard to break. It does not just affect the person who begs, it imprints itself on the next generation, stamping their minds with the belief that dependency is normal. There's a saying that when you beg from people, you sell a piece of your self-respect for a price far cheaper than it deserves. And the saddest part is that sometimes the beggar does not even realize what he has lost. He receives a coin and feels relief, but he does not notice that in the transaction, his confidence, his pride, and his independence are slipping away. Slowly, without fanfare, without noise, he becomes someone smaller than he was meant to be. Have you ever noticed how people who constantly depend on others begin to walk differently? Their shoulders slump, their voices soften, their eyes avoid direct contact. They carry the silent weight of shame. Yet what is most tragic is when that shame turns into entitlement. They begin to believe that the world owes them something. They no longer feel gratitude for what they receive. Instead, they feel resentment for what they don't. The beggar's soul shifts from humility to expectation, and expectation to anger. This is the darkest part of the psychology of begging. It doesn't just weaken, it poisons. Now, imagine a different scenario. A man struggles, but instead of begging, he decides to try. He opens a small stall selling fruits, even if his earnings are little. At the end of the day, he holds his coins in his hand, and though they are few, his heart feels strong. His body is tired, but his spirit is alive. He looks his children in the eye without shame. That dignity fuels him, giving him the courage to wake up and do it again. The difference between the two men is not just financial, it is psychological. One has surrendered, the other has stood. This is why Islam places such emphasis on earning, on striving, on effort. Because Allah knows that the human heart is fragile, that once it learns dependency, it forgets strength. And once it forgets strength, it forgets purpose. The Prophet A said, "It is better for one of you to take a rope, bring a bundle of firewood on his back, and sell it, than to ask of someone who may give or withhold." This is not just advice about work. It is advice about protecting the soul, about guarding the heart from the slow erosion of dignity. Because in the end, begging is not about the hand that is stretched out. It is about the heart that lies behind it. A heart that chooses dependence when strength is possible. A heart that chooses ease when effort is within reach. A heart that slowly convinces itself that it is less than what Allah created it to be. And the greatest poverty of all is not the poverty of the pocket, but the poverty of the spirit. There is something deeply powerful about the first coin you earn with your own hands. It may not be gold, it may not even buy much, but it carries a weight far heavier than wealth. It carries dignity. That coin whispers to you, you are capable, you can create, you can stand, and that whisper fuels the heart in ways no charity ever could. Honest effort, even when small, brings respect that no riches without effort can replace. It brings freedom because you are no longer chained to another's mercy. And most importantly, it brings Barakah, blessing that multiplies beyond what you can see. Imagine a woman in a village weaving baskets from palm leaves. Her stall is modest, her hands are rough, but every basket she sells carries her effort. At the end of the day, she holds a few coins, perhaps less than what someone else might give her in charity. But those coins feel different. They are not a handout, they are her victory. They represent her time, her skill, her determination. When she buys bread with them, she eats not only food but also pride. Her children taste not just sustenance, but the honor of their mother's effort. That is what honest work does. It transforms even the simplest meal into a feast of dignity. The Prophet Muhammad said, "No one has ever eaten food better than that which he earned with his own hands." Think of the depth of that statement. He didn't say the best food is the most expensive, or the most exotic, or the rarest dish. He said the best food is the one that comes from your own sweat, your own labor, your own striving. Because in that food lies something invisible yet priceless, the sweetness of self-reliance, the joy of knowing that what you hold is truly yours. There is a kind of freedom that money alone cannot buy. It is the freedom of not having to lower your gaze in front of others, the freedom of knowing that you can provide without begging, the freedom of walking into your home and being seen as a provider, not a dependent. A man who earns little but works honestly walks taller than a man who receives much without effort. The first is respected even silently by those around him. The second may be pitied or even scorned, because deep inside people know the difference between dignity and dependency. Consider the laborer who digs trenches under the hot sun. His clothes are soaked, his hands blistered, but when evening comes, he carries his wage in his pocket and peace in his heart. He may not have much, but he has freedom. No one owns him, no one controls him, no one makes him feel small. Compare that with someone who depends entirely on others. Even if his pockets are full, his heart feels chained. He worries when the next favor will run out, when people will turn their backs, when his dependence will be exposed. Wealth without effort can be a prison. Effort, even without wealth, can be freedom. And then comes the mystery of Barakah. Barakah is not something you can measure with numbers. It's not visible like coins or notes, but it changes everything. A man may earn a small wage honestly, and somehow it stretches, it provides, it satisfies. Another may gain wealth through dishonesty or idleness, and it slips through his fingers, leaving him restless and unfulfilled. That is Barakah, the divine blessing placed in honest effort. It makes little feel like enough, and enough feel like abundance. It fills not only the stomach, but also the heart. There's a story of a farmer who worked tirelessly in his fields. His land was small, his crops modest, but his heart was content. People asked him how he lived so peacefully when others with far more were always anxious. He smiled and said, "Because every grain I eat, I know where it came from. I know the sweat that watered it, the prayer that blessed it, the honesty that protected it. My food may be simple, but it is full of blessing." That is the secret of honest effort. It feeds the soul before it feeds the body. The Prophet himself tasted this reality. In his youth, he herded sheep for wages, earning coins that were small but pure. Later, he engaged in trade with such honesty that people trusted him even before revelation came. He showed the world that greatness is not measured by how much you are given, but by how much you earn with integrity. His life was proof that honest effort, no matter how small, is a foundation for respect, for freedom, and for divine blessing. When a society values honest work, it values dignity. The streets may be filled with vendors selling fruit, tailors stitching clothes, porters carrying goods, but every one of them walks with their head held high. They are not dependent, they are not idle, they are contributing. And contribution is what keeps a community alive. The coins may be small, but the respect is immense, the freedom is priceless, and the barakah is beyond measure. There comes a moment in every person's life when they must decide where to place their trust. Some place it in people, hoping that friends, neighbors, or society will carry them. Others place it in wealth, thinking that money itself is security. But Islam teaches a higher truth, that true reliance belongs only to Allah, and that real honor comes when your hands move with effort, while your heart rests in His care. It is a balance so delicate yet so powerful, striving as if everything depends on you, but trusting as if everything depends on Him. Imagine a man in the desert, setting out on a journey. He has a camel beside him. If he simply lets it wander, telling himself, "I trust Allah to guard it," he is not practicing trust, he is practicing neglect. But if he ties his camel firmly, prepares his provisions, and then says, "No, I leave it to Allah," that is tawakkul, true reliance. The Prophet Muhammad made this lesson unforgettable when he said, "Tie your camel and then trust in Allah." The honor lies not in sitting back and waiting, but in doing your part with dignity, then leaving the rest to the one who controls all outcomes. There is a deep strength that grows inside a person who works with their hands while knowing that their sustenance is written by Allah. Such a person wakes in the morning, goes out to labor, faces hardship and sweat, but never feels humiliated. Why? Because they know that they are not dependent on people. They are connected to the source of all provision. Each effort they make is an act of worship, a silent prayer in action. Every coin they earn is not just an income, it is a gift from Allah placed in their path through their striving. Think of the farmer who plants seeds. He cannot control the rain. He cannot command the sun. He cannot dictate whether the crop will flourish or fail. But he still digs, still waters, still waits. That is the essence of honor, striving with full effort, but knowing the result lies only in Allah's hands. And when the harvest finally comes, whether large or small, the farmer bows his head in gratitude, because he knows it was not the soil or his hands that gave the fruit, it was Allah. Yet his hands were still the means, the vehicle of that blessing. Without his work, there would be nothing to harvest. The Prophet taught that the most beloved wealth is the wealth earned by a man's own hands. Even if it is a little, it carries light. There is a kind of nobility in earning that cannot be replaced by handouts. A man who feeds his family from his own effort walks into his home with a sense of honor that money alone cannot buy. His children see in him a reflection of responsibility, and his wife sees in him the image of dignity. And above all, Allah sees him as someone who has fulfilled the trust of striving. There is also a quiet danger in relying too much on people. When you rely on others, your heart begins to bend toward them. You worry about their opinion, you fear their rejection, you crave their approval. But when you rely on Allah, your heart straightens. You begin to see the world differently. You no longer beg for people's acceptance, because you already stand under the acceptance of the Creator. You no longer fear being abandoned, because you know Allah never abandons the one who strives. That is true honor, not being chained to people's hands, but being connected to Allah's mercy while your own hands move with effort. I once heard of a craftsman who carved wooden utensils. His shop was small, his earnings modest, yet every morning he would begin with the words, "Ya Allah, today I will carve, and you will provide." At the end of each day, whether he sold one spoon or a dozen, his heart was at peace. His reliance was not on the customers, though he greeted them warmly. His reliance was not on the market, though he worked hard to keep his place. His reliance was on Allah, and his tools were only his means. That man may have been overlooked by the world, but in the sight of Allah, he lived with honor. Reliance on Allah does not mean avoiding effort. It means elevating effort. Because when you believe Allah is the provider, every swing of the hammer, every seed planted, every drop of sweat becomes sacred. You are no longer just earning, you are worshipping. You are no longer just providing, you are fulfilling a divine trust. And this is why the greatest honor is found not in what people give you, but in what Allah grants you through the work of your own hands. True honor lies in walking into the world with your head high, not because you are wealthy, but because you are free. Free from the chains of dependency, free from the humiliation of begging, free from the fear of people's rejection. Your heart bows only to Allah and your hands strive in His path. That is dignity. That is faith in action. And that is the legacy Islam invites every believer to embrace. So now the choice stands in front of you, clearer than ever before. A life of dependency or a life of dignity, a hand that waits or a hand that works, a soul that shrinks or a soul that stands tall. Do not let begging steal your honor. Do not let laziness rob your spirit. Do not let excuses chain your future. Rise, strive, work. Even if it is small, even if it is humble, even if it is difficult. Because every drop of sweat carries more worth than a mountain of pity. Because every honest effort is written in the heavens as worship. Because every coin you earn with dignity plants a seed of freedom in your heart and in your children's hearts. The time is now, not tomorrow, not someday, now, to break the cycle, to reclaim the honor, to trust in Allah and to move your hands with purpose. And remember this, the world respects the hand that gives, not the hand that begs. The angels record the effort that is made, not the excuses that are spoken. And Allah blesses the heart that relies on Him while striving with all its strength. So I ask you, I challenge you, I plead with you, do not walk out of this room the same way you walked in. Walk out with a decision. Walk out with fire in your heart. Walk out ready to choose dignity over dependency, effort over excuses, honor over humiliation. Because in the end, it all comes down to one truth: you must never forget your hand was created to build, to give, to uplift, not to beg.